I'm going to talk about responsive reactive design is what I call it. First let's talk about the state of reactive design. Basically, it boils down to the media query, right? At media, max width, min width, some value, which is good. It's kind of the soul of reactive design or responsive design. Typo. And that's probably not going to change anytime soon. But the problem I have with it is it's kind of a mess. I think media queries are a mess. I really don't like using them. It boils down to a few things I'll talk about in a second, but I'm sure some people get a little defensive because they're like, I've done a lot of great things with media queries, but I hope you'll agree with me in a minute. So what makes a media query a mess? So one thing that I hate is where's the code, right? So for example, if you're not using Sass or less, that means that you are going to have, ideally, your classes grouped together. Like if you have a title that's supposed to be different sizes depending on the width of the screen, you'll have like at media, max width this, or min width and max width, and then like the size of the text for the title, and then another media query with that class with another size. So you get kind of, I call it media query bloat. You just like are loading up your style sheet with like all these media queries. Under Sass and less, you can kind of nest things, which makes it a little prettier. Like, oh, here's all my styles for this width screen right here nested under my media query. But then it's like, okay, if I have, let's say, 5 sizes for the screen and like 500 lines of CSS in this file, and you're like, oh, I want to look at the code for the title, you're going to be looking all through this 500-line file for all your title classes, right? So that's a problem I have. Next, teams can end up with different media queries. I've seen this basically everywhere I've worked. My team comes in, we do some stuff, and then another team's working on another page in the app, and the media queries don't quite match up. So like, my page is responsive at different places than the other page, or even worse is if you're both working kind of in the same area, and like maybe your title changes sizes, but the columns don't rearrange, or something like that. So you've got to make sure you document it well, make sure like designers have an understanding. Okay, these are our breakpoints. Another thing, you can only query screen width, and I've seen a lot of people run into this. Like, what if we have like a big slide out menu or something, and we want the page to draw differently because the real estate you're using is smaller, right? So you can't really do that with media queries. It only works from the size of your window. This is something that's always bugged me, is that components will always load. So let's think about, the lowest end devices that are going to be viewing the screen are phones, and those are the things that are hiding elements, but those elements, you don't get the performance gain for not rendering those elements because you're still rendering those elements and then they're being hidden by the media query, right? And then last thing, what if we want to test something? What if we have kind of a complex layout? We want to know this is showing, this is hiding. Well, you basically need an end-to-end test or something so that you can test this is what my UI looks like at these sizes of screen. And that's a pretty big hassle. So what do you do? And the solution I've come around to is RxJS. Saves the day, once again. And eats that poor man's head. But it's I like to think of it as less eating, but more of some sort of symbiotic relationship. Like, yeah, yeah. Anyway, RxJS, it's great, and I'm always finding it applies to more things than I thought it did. So, what if we track the screen size in an observable, and then we subscribe to it to detect the screen sizes throughout our app? Okay, so this way you would get like codified. What are my screen sizes? That can be communicated easily. Everyone knows, okay, I'm using this service or library or whatever. And so these are our screen sizes. And that's what the designers have to fit toward. And the real key is, if you have a whole bunch of apps, they can have different breakpoints. But like, I want an app to have its breakpoints match, right? So let's talk about those points that I said why media queries are a mess. So with RxJS, and I'll show you examples of this in a couple minutes, you get to decide where the code is, where it lives, how the CSS is structured. You don't have to, there's just a lot more flexibility. You decide the app's breakpoints, meaning you set them, they stay that way. Everyone else isn't setting their own breakpoints and coding their own media queries that way. You can account for complex layouts like that citing menu bar thing that I mentioned. Components only load when needed. So if you're running all this out of an observable, well, you can throw an ngIf or whatever on there, and all of a sudden you don't have to load that component if it's not going to show on the screen. And you can test your layouts. So if you have this observable, if you have some complex logic deciding when things should show or whatever, you can write a test around that. You don't have to depend on end-to-end tests or whatever. You can test that however you'd like. The core to this is Angular Material CDK. I'm doing a modified version of this talk at Utah.js conference, and I'm putting together a library that will do this for other frameworks as well. Just taking some leads from the CDK. And so they have something in there called layout. So if I come over here to the Angular CDK page, here we have the layout behavior. And this breakpoint observer is what we're going to focus on. And basically what you do is you can hand it a media query, and it will give you back an observable that returns true or false when that media query is met. Okay. So, and they have some preset ones. I tend to not use these a ton, just because most of the time my designers are like a lot more exacting. But anyways, breakpoint observer is the soul of this. So next thing we do, let's look at a Windows size service. So this is what I did. I just built a service, and this is kind of what it looks like. Still iterating a little bit on this, but for now, what I'm doing is I'm creating an enum. So if someone decides that we need an additional width or something like that, it'll be tracked throughout the app, and we can detect errors before we have a problem. So I define. This is kind of all the screen sizes we might care about in moment, right? And then here's my interface for screen widths. And I do it this way. Like I could have the observable like return a string. Oh, this is like extra small or something like that. But I like being able to be like, oh, you don't have to worry about whether the string you typed matches one of these like 7 strings. You just do screen widths dot whatever size. And this is more used internally, just telling me what the breakpoints for the screen sizes are. I'll scroll down to the actual code. We use the breakpoint observer, and I'm using behavior subject because it will always return a value, the last value it had, and because it's subject, I always make that private and return as observable. So this class has a property on its sizes. That is the observable of that behavior subject. Add this is mobile state just for convenience. But anyways, breakpoint observer, here I am setting up all of my media queries in essence. So here's extra small. So this will be anything below whatever this extra small pixel size was. If I scroll up here, everything below 480 will show up here. And this is 480 to like 600, whatever. So I set up all these for the sizes we wanted. And what that gives me is it gives me an observable of, I'll scroll back up here, of this object here, which looks like this, right? But one of these values will be true, okay? And so what this does is now, if I want to use this to detect screen sizes, all I do is subscribe to this observable and or use the async pipe and say, is it this screen width dot extra small, and I will know the size of the screen. So now that we've got this window size service set up, move on to some examples. So first up on the examples, this is going to be the same list as we saw before. You get to decide where your code is. So again, old paradigm, you have media query. Either you have a media query and then a whole, and then the class for your title, and another media query in that class again, another media query, that class again. Now what we can do, if we look at this file, I've got a couple ways you can do this. This is the way I'm doing here. Title class, that's like the base class for my title. And then I just namespace the sizes that I want to override that. So I add on the class medium if our screen size is medium. I add the class large if our screen size is large, and extra large if the screen is extra large. And what this gives me is in my CSS, I kind of just namespace it. We don't get the media query bloat, and we don't get the nesting issue where you have to scroll through like your whole file to find it. So this title will always get this class, and then depending on the size, we end up overriding the font size with whatever font size we want. And in the end, we end up with this screen. You can watch the font size here as I adjust this, but we're going to switch to like a smaller size, bigger size, mobile size, and that's all without using the @media query. We're just going off of observables. So that's pretty cool. Another thing you can do that I did here, because I'm actually using this title a lot, so if I click forgot password, we'll come on here. So this is I want all that same stuff again, so I just turned it into a directive. This one's actually using the directive. Commented it out here, this login title. If we look at the directive just gets that window size service, and if it sees the size is medium, it sets the font size to 29 pixels. If the size is large, if the size is extra large, and then throws it onto the element. So it's easy to throw this into a directive and not have to deal with the media queries. You're just working with an observable. So you get to decide where your code is. Next, you get to decide an app's breakpoints. So something that I did here, we're using a NX project. So we're going to have a bunch of apps. So this window size service I showed before, this is like a library for all these apps where I'm codifying. These are all the breakpoints we're going to care about in any of these apps. And then the designers, they're going to decide on breakpoints for the app that you're working on. And this is more, when I get the library done that I'm going to show in Utah.js, it's going to basically do what this service here is doing. And then users would write their own service that kind of abbreviates that into the sizes that they care about for their app. So most apps probably not going to care about all of these sizes. So our app in particular only cares about 5 sizes. And so I go through a process of just turning those screen sizes, like extra small 1, extra small 2 turns into extra small, small 1, 2, and medium 1 turns into small. So I kind of just turn that into, these are the sizes we care about for this app, and then when we go to another app, we can be like, okay, do we care about supporting mobile? Okay, maybe we don't need those. Do we care about whatever? We can make those decisions when it comes there, and we can decide that then. And then everybody that's working on that app, they're going to be using the same breakpoints everywhere. You can account for complex layouts. So this is something I've heard people ask questions about even in the Utah Angular meetup, but I actually had a need for at my current employer. So let's look at this app real quick. So let me adjust this a little bit. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, so this app, it's a kind of, it was a concept for a survey builder. This isn't anything that we have in production or anything, but they kind of wanted, okay, here's like a summary of questions for the survey. Here's like almost what it will look like when it's actually made. And then if you click on one of these, we want this like edit thing to slide in the middle where you can adjust some stuff, what type of question it is, maybe the prompt, text for it, that kind of, all that stuff. But when this is expanded, all of a sudden, we don't think we have all the room to squeeze that in the middle there because now we have the side menu out. So we want it to overlay over the top, much like it would in a mobile view. So if I squeeze this down to like mobile view, we'll see if I click on one of these, pop over the top, and you'll see that summary view is gone. This is popping over the top of the actual survey. If I bring it back wider again, we'll see that summary comes back. I click this, now watch. Now it's in the middle. Now it's over the top. That's not something you could ever do with Media Query because we're dependent on app state, right? Now this kind of becomes super useful if you're using something like NGRX where you know, your app is actually a representation of your model, right? So this expanding and collapsing of this menu bar is actually an observable itself, which means that you can chain those observables, okay? So what I'm doing here, let me grab my other window. What I'm doing here, this looks a little complex, but there's a lot of stuff going on that screen. I showed you if it's in like mobile view, that summary panel isn't showing, just that that like preview panel is showing, and if you click on it, then it's going to show over the top of that. If it's a little wider, it's going to show over the top of the summary portion. If it's wider than that, it's going to show in the middle, and then that slide out menu also gets into it. Anyways, this is one of the reasons it's nice to be able to test these things, right? What I use, combine latest. So anytime another value comes down, here's the sidebar observable. So if another value comes down the sidebar, it's going to make an evaluation about what should be showing. So here, well, I'll scroll down. So if I scroll down here, we'll see I have an interface for like the view state for this page that I'm calculating out of all this. And then in here, like we have a string for a switch statement, and it evaluates all these things about the size of the screen, about whether the sidebar is expanded, and makes decisions about what should be showing on the screen. So you can get into some pretty complex layouts, and it's all governed through observables, which I think is great. So complex layouts, much easier and testable. And then components load when needed. This is something that was really important to me because I was like, I really hate the idea of loading all this stuff. So if we come in here, you can see, oh, here's another class where I'm kind of namespacing the class and adjusting it depending on the screen size. But if I scroll down here, we have an ngIf. So if the screen size is medium, or it's large, or it's extra large, we're going to show the marketing pane. So if it's small or extra small, I'm not going to show the marketing pane. So the component never asks to load if someone's on a mobile device, where like this marketing pane, it's a carousel with a bunch of marketing images and all this stuff. So it's like, that would be, you know, a performance hit to have to download those images and those things. So anyways, that's awesome. And then finally, you can test your layouts. Like I said a minute ago, if we look at this, this is some complex judgment going on about what things should show, where they should show in that other page. And now we can write tests around this because it's all observables, it's all in our TypeScript. Pretty trivial. This is just a work example, and that was just kind of a POC, so I don't have the test to show. But it's just simple. You could do your marble testing on your view, which is pretty cool. So conclusion, I'm really happy to not have to worry about media queries anymore. Like, the only worrying I had to do is to set up that breakpoint observer in the first place with the Angular CDK layout. And yeah, it was set up to, you know, make homegrown components responsive, but it is a very nice fit for just layout in general. So yeah, that's my thoughts on cleaning up your CSS and giving you some performance and testability gains. That's it.